Well, hello, Faith Family, and thank you for joining me in this Tuesday edition of the Daily Connections, a time when we get together in the Word, and more importantly, the Word gets into us. So we're still talking about the topic of loving loyalty. We're dealing today specifically with Ruth chapter 1, verses 11 through 14, which tell us, but Naomi replied. So this is Naomi's reply to Ruth and Orpah's response to her initial challenge. So this is her reply. Return home, my daughters. Why do you want to go with me? Am I able to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. Go on. For I'm too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me to have a husband tonight and to bear sons, would you be willing to wait for them to grow up? Would you restrain yourselves from remarrying? No, my daughters. My life is much too bitter for you to share because the Lord's hand has turned against me. Again they wept loudly. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. All right, so here we have I guess we can say the reality of the challenges that we face sometimes when it comes to loyalty. People that we love and frankly who love us dearly as well, and who have some of the greatest intentions. Oftentimes, they challenge us in loyalty. And although their intentions may be well served and may be good in motive, a lot of times maybe it's misguided a little bit, and that's kind of sort of maybe what's happening here, for instance. Here we have Naomi just looking at things from a practical perspective, saying, what reason do you have to stay with me? She said, in terms of your need, I can't possibly provide you with a husband. She almost says it in terms of a little bit of sarcasm. Hey, even if I could marry a man tonight and conceive, are you willing to wait for that child to grow up? Roughly 2 decades, about 20 years old or so, in order for you to have a husband? I don't think so. Your desire is to remarry, and so she's bringing all these practical elements into play. First of all, acknowledging that I'm too old to restart it. I don't even want to remarry. Secondly, if I remarry today and conceive tonight, then would you be willing to wait? No, you wouldn't, because your desire obviously is to remarry because you're young. You want to have a family. So she's trying to mix together the realities of her age, the realities of their age and their desires, and those are good desires. To say, hey, it's okay, I understand. You owe me nothing. And 3 different times she emphatically insists that they leave her. First in verse 11, return home. Then again in verse 12, return home. Lastly, in verse 13, no, my daughters. My life is much too bitter. So 3 different times she's encouraging them to leave her, that they should not remain loyal to her. And yet we see in verse 14 that although one, it's implied, is going to take her advice, that's Orpah, because verse 15 says that she leaves. Ruth is not, she's not in any way deterred by Naomi's insistence that she leave. Instead, it says right here, Ruth clung to her. That's a very strong word in the Hebrew in terms of the idea of loyalty and the idea of remaining committed to something. And that's the thing about loyalty. Loyalty oftentimes requires a high level of commitment, a commitment that can look beyond the hurt of the best intended words, a commitment that can look beyond the disappointments, a commitment that can look beyond even the practical. Sometimes loyalty demands that we even look beyond what is practically before us, because we believe there is a greater good to be accomplished in the long run. And perhaps that's where Ruth is right now. I can't believe she understands what God is doing here, because she's a Moabite. She's not coming from that ground where there should have been a strong influence toward Yahweh. And yet, there's still a sense of loyalty and commitment to Naomi. And of course, God's working through that ultimately to bring about Messiah, because we know Messiah will come through the lineage, through Ruth and Boaz. And so it's a pretty challenging picture for us, because I know for me, a lot of times when someone is this resistant, when they're all flat out rejecting me, and they're making practical arguments for that. Oh, and by the way, Naomi kind of lets us in a little bit, opens the window a little bit into her soul when she says in verse 13, my daughters, my life is much too bitter for you to share, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. And so she's even saying, hey, you don't want to stay with me because even the Lord's against me. And of course, that shows some misguided theology on her part, because she's not the only one suffering. Her people are suffering as well, but more importantly, she's not seeing beyond the moment here. And so she said, hey, my life is bitter. I'm a bitter person. You don't want to stay with me. So she's giving them all these reasons to leave. But the fact of the matter is, Ruth saw the one reason to stay, and that was commitment and loyalty. Loyalty to a woman who at one point had given her her husband, and now she was remaining loyal to her. And it's just a reminder that in many cases, a loyalty to one that we love and one that we appreciate and one who has reciprocated that love to us as well. Sometimes loyalty is going to demand such an intense level of commitment that we've got to endure some harsh words. We've got to endure some difficult realities. But we've got to do it with a belief that a greater good is coming. That can be applied to our marriage. That can be applied to family relationships, maybe parent to child, child to parent. That can be applied to work environment. That can be applied to neighbors, friends, coworkers, you name it. That can especially be applied within the family of God. I mean, how many times out of loyalty you stay committed to someone who maybe was caught in a sinful act, and sadly, some within the faith family have even shunned them, and yet you remain loyal. And that person shunned you; they rejected you by their own defense, out of a desire that you wouldn't get hurt, and yet you were there. You were faithful, and so just know this: we have to demonstrate the loyalty of Christ. Christ remained faithful, so therefore we must remain faithful as well. And the writer asks a question right here. It says, what's something in your life to which you've demonstrated a strong commitment? And I want you to think about that. I want you to think about relationships. Maybe right now you're in a season where a relationship is being strained. A relationship is difficult because the other person, the other party in the relationship is just like Naomi here, almost basically telling you to go, get. Meanwhile, your sense of loyalty to them will not be deterred. And just remember that when it came to challenges, nobody's been challenged like Christ has. And yet nobody's been as faithful as Christ has. So therefore, you demonstrate the same level of faithfulness and commitment and remain loyal to that one. And you know what? That loyalty will ultimately show up in the way that they receive your love and, Lord willing, in the long run, reciprocate that love back to you. Well, love you, Faith family. I pray you have a great day. Until we're together again, live sent.